Hello and welcome to the Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding podcast. This is the second episode in our mini-series on Chinese clothing. Today we discuss Hanfu, a type of traditional Chinese clothing which has undergone a 21st century revival. Anyone who has visited China in recent years will have noticed that many Chinese people, especially young men and women, enjoy dressing up in traditional outfits. Particularly at historic sites like the Forbidden City, you will see people wearing flowing robes, elaborate hairstyles, and ornate dresses. This type of clothing is not just costume or fancy dress. These clothes represent a movement that has crept across China over the last 2 decades. It is a style of clothing called Hanfu. The word literally means Han clothing, and Han is the name of China's largest ethnic group, with Han people representing 91% of the country's population. Han was the name of an early imperial dynasty, and Hanyu is one of the names used for the Chinese language. So why is Hanfu distinct from other types of Chinese fashion? The last dynasty of Chinese emperors, the Qing, were not Han, but from a different ethnic group. They were Manchus from China's far north. The Qing dynasty ruled China from the early 17th century to the start of the 20th century, and brought in laws that required Han Chinese to wear Manchu clothing and to cut their hair in the Manchu style. The Qing dynasty was followed by the Republic of China, and then by the People's Republic of China. And for the 20th century, Chinese clothing was greatly influenced by Western styles. Hanfu largely disappeared from people's wardrobes. Many of the icons of Chinese fashion, like Tang jackets, the Mao suit, and the qipao, are later inventions from the Qing, Republican, or Communist eras, and are therefore distinct from authentic Hanfu. Hanfu is a revival movement, which looks to Chinese clothing from before the Qing era, such as during the Tang, Song, or Ming dynasties. Hanfu is not a single style. The term itself is a modern one, but is based on many different styles of dress from 1,000 years of Chinese history. In 2026, Hanfu is part of China's cultural mainstream. On any Chinese social media network, you will find photos and videos of countless Chinese people wearing traditional outfits. It has been estimated that tens of millions of people buy Hanfu each year. The value of the Hanfu market is in the hundreds of millions of pounds. The participants are mostly young and mostly female. Even in Western cities like London, Chinese visitors and overseas students sometimes dress up to take photographs in scenic areas. But the re-emergence of Hanfu only began in the early 2000s. And it was about more than dressing up for photographs. It was a way for Han Chinese people to express their identity. Practitioners also revived cultural practices from Chinese history. As China opened up and as consumers had more cash to spend, Hanfu was a way for Han people to explore their culture. Some commentators have even criticized the practice, suggesting it represents a form of nationalism or chauvinism. To learn more, I spoke to Andrew Law and Qianqian, academics at the University of Newcastle, who conducted research among Hanfu movement members in China. Could I start by asking you to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Hi, I'm Andrew Law. I'm a senior lecturer in town planning. I was also the director of the Confucius Institute at Newcastle University. I've done that for 3.5 years and a bit longer. And academically speaking, I'm actually a sociologist and I'm interested in cultural studies. And I think it's fair to say in the last 15 years, I've become interested in sinology and Chinese studies. My areas are often issues to do with collective memory, heritage, and how people remember the past, both in China but also globally.
Hi, I'm Qianqian, or to say Qianqian in Chinese. So I'm also a lecturer in urban planning in the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape in Newcastle University. So in the last 15 years, I've also involved in doing quite a lot of research on Chinese urban studies, collaborating with Andy and other colleagues as well. So really, I'm a trained urban geographer, so I'm quite interested in a lot of things in relation to China urban development. So Hanfu is part of the urban movement we've noticed in the past few years.
And just for someone who might not have been to China and might not know what Hanfu is, how would you describe it on a physical level?
Well, I think compared to the modern clothes or the Western style clothes we wear today, Hanfu is definitely more. There's more layers to it, and most Well, there are different styles of Hanfu for different dynasties. There are models of Hanfu, but in most dynasty, the Hanfu layout are generally quite on review of your body. So most of your body parts would be covered by layer after another layer, with the exception of the Tang dynasty, because Tang dynasty Hanfu appears to be quite revealing in some ways. Yeah.
How do these items of clothing get designed? Do people look at drawings of clothing? Were there examples in museums they could draw from? How did this style of dress get rediscovered?
I mean, my understanding to that is the Hanfu members we met, they often went back to classical history books or museums to look at older costumes in the museums. Yeah.
It's definitely well recorded through Chinese literature history, and quite a few famous books like the Red Chamber,
Yeah. Dream of the Red Chamber.
Dream of the Red Chamber, 《红楼梦》. They talked extensively about the Han culture clothes with their characters. And also there was one Chinese writer called Shen Tongwen. He used to conduct kind of research on Han Chinese clothes as well. So a lot of the respondents we met who actually specialize in designing Han ethnic clothes would go back to those kind of classics to find inspirations or find ideas about how to design their Hanfu.
Anyone who's been to China will have seen lots of people dressed up in what just looks to them like traditional Chinese clothing. Or even as they go around London or scenic places in the UK, they might increasingly see Chinese people wearing this sort of clothing. But you describe Hanfu as being more of a movement. Could you just explain how it works? Like, is it the people you see, are they part of the movement, or is it more nebulous than that?
I think that's a great question, and now I think we're getting into the nitty gritty of it because so far we've discussed almost like the surface of this stuff. My understanding is there's probably like a vast majority of people doing it for fun. Yeah, there's a lot of people doing it for fun, and I suspect mainly young women. But then there's a core of people where it's quite serious. It's probably smaller than the core is probably smaller than the number of people who are wearing it for reasons because it looks pretty or aesthetically beautiful. And then there's a core inside the movement which takes it quite seriously and has political aspirations attached to it. Then it's not a bit of fun at all. It's something very, very different.
Talk me through that. Thinking back to the first people you spoke to who were wearing Hanfu, would you think they were part of a movement, or do you think they just saw the nice clothes, maybe saw it on Xiaohongshu and thought, I'd like to get some photographs like that? Like, how do you distinguish between people who see these clothes and want to take nice photographs and people who are more part of the movement?
Well, I think when you speak to movement members, for example, it's not just fancy dress. It includes rituals, visiting, say, heritage sites, not just heritage sites, but reenactments of ancestor worship, archery, quite choreographed movements to do with dancing. Traditional practices, even the archery is choreographed. So there's a whole thing but really behind it, there's a set of values. This is where it gets quite complicated. When we started out, one of the reasons we were actually interested in it, well, one of the reasons I was interested in it was issues to do with racism. So the Hanfu movement, there's one author who wrote a very good ethnography. He's called Kevin Carrico. I think, if I remember correctly, he's in Australia. I think he's American. I'm not quite sure. I need to check. But he wrote an excellent ethnography, and his ethnography was really, really critical of them and described them as quite racist. The target of their racism was the Manchurian people, who were held as responsible for the destruction of Hanness, if you like. My experience meeting the Hanfu in 2013 wasn't quite like that. My personal view of them back then. I mean, they might have changed, but I found them what you might call unconsciously or implicitly ethnocentric. Yep. So not really racist, and in fact, if anything, there was definitely ethnocentric thinking. For example, the Qi Pao, which is a Republican form of dress associated with Chinese people, was definitely seen as not Hanfu because it was seen as having foreign and also Manchurian roots. But generally speaking, actually, we found a lot of evidence to suggest that lots of the people we met weren't thinking in terms of race at all, or not even ethnicity. They were more concerned with what they saw as almost like a spiritual decline in China. Did you want to say something, Chen Chen?
I want to add something. I think age is definitely a key thing
Yeah.
when we're thinking about whether it's just a bit of fun or like a cosplay or it's serious as a movement. Because the first bunch of respondents we talked to are those 12 to 18-year-old from a middle school in Beijing. So for
Yeah.
them, when we talk to them, it's more like a fun thing. It's like a cosplay, but a Chinese style cosplay. So, but when we get into the research, we get to know more people from the movement, especially those at their late 20s or early 30s, or even like late 40s, early 50s. For those people, I think Hanfu carries more weight than for the younger generation
Yeah.
who just left middle school or in the university or something. So for those mature kind of participants, they put a lot of weight or more attachment towards the clothes or the meanings of cultures or the kind of messages carried by Hanfu. That's young people.
Could we start by talking about the Hanfu movement as a movement? Like, how did it emerge, and what does it look like in practice?
Okay. Well, I mean, my understanding of its origins is actually there's disputes about its origins. So scholars, for example, have got different perspectives on how it arose. One thing that came up, I guess, I think Carago talked about this, but one origin or suggestion was, I think it was a reaction somewhere to, it might have been the Olympics or something like this, but people in East Asia had gone in traditional dress. For example, South Korean people had turned up in traditional dress, and also Japanese participants had turned up in traditional dress. But then when the Chinese participants, I think it was the Olympics or some political,
APEC.
it was APEC, sorry, Chin-Chin's right, APEC summer, that what had happened is the Chinese representatives had just turned up in suits and formal Western clothes. And so there was a reaction online and an online reaction in China and a suggestion, basically, where's our traditional clothes? Where's the clothes of the Han people? We're just wearing Western clothes. This isn't us. And so someone started sporting Hanfu online. I've forgotten the person's name. I think it was a bloke, but he was sporting a Hanfu outfit, and people said, "This is great. This is what we should be doing." Um, and it's interesting, Joseph, because I think there's a slight tension here as well. I think slightly, possibly, um, the Chinese government might not have wanted to push Hanfu originally because of their own commitment to the idea of multiculturalism in China. And given that there's 56 ethnic groups, I know for a fact that the Chinese Communist Party has been critical of Han chauvinism in the past. There's a slight nervousness originally. I don't think the government's so worried about it anymore. But my feeling was at the beginning there was a hesitation, should we call it? I think that's fair.
How did that Hanfu movement grow? What does it look like as a movement, and how has it become more diffuse?
Well, I think my understanding is that a lot of it started to primarily grow from the net, netizens. It's a netizen response. And I have a feeling that society started to grow in lots of different cities. I mean, the main thing is, as Chin pointed out earlier, it's urban. It's an urban move. It's growing in cities primarily. I've I didn't find in our studies any evidence of a rural Hanfu society.
Mm.
You want to say something?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it really take up as a youth movement.
Yeah.
So really, it's young people in universities trying to spread it through their networks, through the internet, and so it got to seen by more people and got attracted more people get involved. Even though I don't think they are the core kind of group of people initiated the thing, the movement, but it's really from them that where the movement starts to get spreaded. And nowadays, you could see overseas Chinese students come to study in the West, in the UK or in Italy or in France. You will see them wearing hanfu, taking photos with people. So without them, it's impossible to kind of spread this culture over like abroad to other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's obviously become very broad now because you can't go to like a Chinese tourist destination without seeing a couple of stalls where you can hire hanfu. And
That's
what does the actual formal movement look like in practice? How do people get involved? And like, aside from dressing up like they're from the Tang Dynasty, what do they do?
Well, I think my sort of rough understanding is they will certainly, practice or have events around holidays, spring holidays. Well, I guess the Spring Festival.
Traditional Chinese holidays, which hasn't been properly recognized by the modern calendar we're using.
Mm.
Yeah, so celebration of traditional Chinese holidays, and then general activities. For example, if you joined a Hanfu group, say in, I don't know, Beijing or Chengdu, they might invite you to activities days where you dress up. Some of it's definitely aesthetic and photographic. For example, we went to one activities day in Shanghai. We went to a park near the Guilin Road in Shanghai, and it was absolutely lovely. And people were basically taking photos of each other in the traditional costumes in front of scenic traditional Chinese settings, like pagodas or lakes where things look beautiful. And particularly people might again partake in things like traditional games, archery, some very beautiful dancing. I mean, it's very beautiful to look at. That's a fact. Um, and also, people the women might carry parasols. So there's a sort of idea of. Also, I think there's a celebration of East Asian beauty or ideas of East Asian beauty, and probably masculinity and femininity as well.
Yeah, it's kind of showing the culture elegance that we once had in Chinese history.
Yeah.
Things like reciting poems or kind of playing games, traditional games like archery or
Mhm.
Hu. I can't remember how to say that in English, but that kind of traditional
Yeah, you
Chinese
throw
games
arrows into vases.
into vases. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, this kind of things that people do that kind of to show how elegant we used to be in history.
I I have a small point to add there, Joseph. One of the things, this goes back to values again, because there's values behind it. I'd say that nearly every group I met in the different cities, and there's lots of different there's quite a few groups in the cities. There's not just one Hanfu group. There's several, some attached to universities, some are just seen as city-wide groups, yeah. But one thing I found, again, is the idea of etiquette. This seemed to be a really key word that what Hanfu practitioners are trying to push is a sort of notion of, I guess, you know, good conduct, good behavior, as well as elegance. There's this idea of some kind of civilized etiquette. That's what I see Hanfu as mainly pushing, this idea of good conduct, good behavior, and elegance.
Mhm.
That's really fascinating. Sorry, Chen Chen.
I just want to add a lot of time you find out young people start with Hanfu, but then they start to explore the things behind Hanfu, like Chinese literature, Chinese classics, calligraphy, or Chinese culture, in broader sense, any kind of the things that we used to in history, but we don't do them these days. So I think it's a window to young people sometimes, they get to know the clothes first and they start to explore the things behind it. And they get to know more people who are interested in the same sort of thing. And they do more collaborative kind of stuff, trying to spread, present Hanfu in kind of public spaces, this kind of thing. So I think gives them kind of identity somehow. I mean, I might jump to the next topic, but yeah.
Just wondered if you could explain about the role of etiquette in the Hanfu movement. Like, what do people mean by that?
Well, I think this is the magic button. Okay, so this is where I've written extensively on this with Qianqian. This is how we've been published. My gut feeling at looking at all the data that we collected, I think the idea of etiquette is the key. And what's behind that is actually a criticism of modern Chinese society. So that there is this idea. I think the Hanfu movement is structured by the idea of decline. Now, what Kevin Carrico was suggesting is that, this decline is based on a sort of paranoid, racist sort of idea. And I don't think that's what we found at all. It was more for me, reading through all the transcripts and the interviews we've done, what really stands out is the idea of, I guess, commercialism, the breakdown in values of values as a response to hyper commercialism. I think that's one thing. Basically, intense materialism, shopping. But look, the main point, rather than a sort of Marxist critique or something of Chinese capitalism, the main point is that the people we met were worried about behavior, good behavior. They said people are more angry now, less, I guess, less social glue they were complaining about, and a loss of good conduct, rudeness. That rudeness came up quite a bit. Selfishness we're talking about, really. You could read that as sort of the rise of westernization in China. That's one reading. But I think Hanfu members said that the problem doesn't just come from the Qing dynasty. It comes from, a variety of factors. It's not just a loss of Hanness, but again, the loss of good values. For example, they did mention groups of people they weren't happy about. And so there was some kind of othering going on. Now, Kevin Carrico said that other was the Manchurians, but again, we didn't find that. The other was, well, one, nouveau riche, the sort of new money brigade, people with lots of money and poor manners. They did moan a little bit about the poor, but actually, there was a kind of mini Spitzer story. I did find some of that. But actually, I think rather than say, it's all the fault of poorly educated poor people, they didn't just moan about poor people, they were moaning about society more broadly. Again, new money, lots of money, and no manners, if you want. So a kind of critique of new money, and sometimes actually complaints about the older generation. So I have got people on record telling me that the older generation, they're only concerned with get a job, get married, make lots of money, and that's your life in China. And their reaction to this was, but there's more to Chinese life than just money, and we want to revive etiquette. Some people did mention the Cultural Revolution as well as a spiritual whole, if you like, or a moment where China had lost its way. So again, as I said, one argument has been the Hanfu is against the Manchurian people, blah, 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 and it's the Manchurians that caused decline. But from the data I collected and the people that Qianqian and I met, my sense was it was more sort of a spiritual kind of feeling of materialism, consumption, the rise of individualism and rudeness. And that was really, if you like, the other or the point of decline. So etiquette, if we get back to etiquette is the medicine in a way. It's the solution, the antidote to poor behavior, to rudeness. People mention, for example, angry drivers, road rage. I mean, obviously we know road rage very well in Britain as a feature of British life and no doubt European and American life. But Chinese people talk to me about, anger on the roads and that they felt it never been this bad before. So that's it. So it's a critique of the modern world and a critique of, I think, sort of individualism and consumerism, and again, an obsession with the new money, getting married as quick as possible and settling down. And I think these young people are saying we want more. We actually want more from our society. It's not just a return to the past. It also seems to be a return to community and good behavior. I mean, it is romantic, and arguably they are, to my mind, quite conservative in that way. I don't mean conservative politically, but conservative with a small c. They're a young conservative movement, to my mind. But at the same time, I can also appreciate how they feel about individualism. And yeah, I feel, I don't feel negative or positive about them. I feel more, as I say, sociological. Does that sound reasonable, Joseph?
That does, yeah. The research you conducted, tell me about what the two of you did to research Hanfu.
Usually what I did was employ sort of sociological methods, because I'm a sociologist, obviously. So what that meant was, originally I started off with unstructured interviewing. Uh, so we met people, we sort of created snowball samples. It wasn't some kind of hard scientific positivist study where, we looked for a mathematical sampling. No, it was more theoretical. So we met people and snowballed from one person to the next, and then we sometimes approached groups in different cities because these groups were advertised online, and we could find out details about the groups through WeChat. But when we got there and we met groups, then we'd often meet as many group members, leaders, and also subgroup members as we could. And we went particularly to what we'd call these core groups rather than just everyday people having fun. So we could try to understand and discern those values, get a sense of those values. But yeah, so originally we started out with what I'd call unstructured interviewing, and the interviews would sometimes go on for hours. So it could be 2 or 3 hours long. So I'd ask questions, like the kind of questions you're asking, like, when did you get into this? What were your reasons? What's your feeling about X or Y? And then as the interviews progressed, we conducted about 65 interviews in the end. So 65 in-depth interviews. Yeah, could be 2 or 3 hours long. And as the interviews progressed, actually our questions got more structured. But at the beginning, I was really unstructured because I had no clue about these people and I had no clue about what to ask them. So that was the first method. And then I guess the next sort of method was more what we call in sociology ethnographic methods, which really just refers to spending time with people. So I'd attend activities days. Qianqian and I would do this, and Qianqian and I bought Hanfu, so we'd dress up and join in. We go to as many activities days as we could. Often that they were seasonal, so we didn't attend lots of them, but it was important to attend these to get the sense of how the Hanfu was practiced, how these movements practice what they preach. So that was it. So we'd then take part in games like archery. And actually, just to tell you a small anecdote, when I was in Xi'an, I went to one of these ritual days, ritual activities in a park, I think north of Xi'an. But anyway, there was archery there. And what was really interesting, Joseph, just to say, is while I was conducting the archery and firing arrows, the leader of the Hanfu group in Xi'an would correct my bodily posture all the time, correct my stance, the way I held the bow, how I shot the arrows, what I did with my arms afterwards. I'd have to raise one of my arms after I'd fired the arrows. So again, it was about posture, etiquette, again, behavior. We went to tea ceremonies as well. So it was all about, how you behave, how you hold your body, how you comport yourself. So very, very much about posture, good behavior, routine, ritual, habits, and getting into good habits. So as well as beauty and elegance, again, I would go back to this idea of etiquette. I think etiquette is the primary thing I came across. Again, that sort of Jane Austen sense of good conduct, sense and sensibility in a way.
Mm. What was the biggest surprise for you when you were conducting your research? Was there anything that caught you off guard as you were finding more out about Hanfu?
Uh, I suppose, I mean, for me, probably Qianqian maybe has less surprises, but for me, I guess I thought that I would hear, because I had an understanding of some of the research previously. I thought it would actually be more racist or more conservative, and I didn't find that. I found they were much more nuanced, and in a way that was really pleasing, and in a way that demonstrates the problem with social research. It can be very subjective, but it also depends on the time. For example, a study done before us was done a bit earlier, and it's very likely that Kevin, for example, Kevin Carrico, he's probably interviewed more sort of what I call nationalists, or ethnocentrics, if you like, should we call them that? But I didn't find that was so strong. It was a theme that we did come across some Han chauvinism, but it was in a minority rather than the majority of our findings. So actually, it was a pleasant surprise, but there's sort of more nuanced feelings. Actually, surprisingly, maybe I thought it'd be a bit more black and white, but it certainly wasn't. It was grey and complex. Um, and again, I think it spoke more to youth as well, feelings the youth of China felt, or young adults, should we say. So that was a surprise. I thought given the literature I read was quite negative. So I thought, oh, this is going to be a kind of nationalist movement, and they're going to be very little-minded, a lot more nuanced and complex, actually. They were quite complex. Chin.
Don't think I've
Yeah.
I've got surprised. I think a lot of things they talked about, I kind of recognize it myself, but it's actually a good opportunity for me to discover myself or my own identity while I was conducting the research with Andy actually. So it's actually when meeting the older generations, when they actually Hanfu is not just a kind of cosplay thing, a bit of fun in life. When they actually structure their life around Hanfu, like they have summer Hanfu, they have winter Hanfu, they have autumn Hanfu, all those things. That starts to strike me about that some people start to look for identity in it rather than just a bit of fun. So there's more than that. So to some part of the participants. So I mean that's a little before that I didn't actually know there are people who structure their life around it, uh, this kind of things. But yeah, it's that's what I found out. Yeah.
I think Chin's right. There really is a sense that, you know, when we met some people, it was just a bit of fun. It was just cosplay. But for other people, it's a whole way of life.
Mm. I think that is a really interesting aspect to it. Chen, did you grow up in China? I should have asked this at the start, of
Yes,
course,
I
but
did. I grew up in China, and I did most of my degree, not degree, my schooling in China as well. I only came to the UK in my early 20s.
was Hanfu something you noticed when you were growing up in China, or was it something that like emerged like in your adulthood?
Not really. Yeah, you would say this from the TV, the what do you call that, the historical dramas. You say those kind of things from them, but you think, oh, it's so elegant, when the characters in the dramas wearing hanfu, doing all those dancing or moves, it's so elegant, you recognize that, but it's something that stays in the TV, not come to real life, It's really when we started doing this research, or shall we say like the early 20s or early 21st century, or like
Mm.
2003, 2007, around that period, I start to realize Hanfu has come from the TV to the everyday life.
So when was it you first noticed Hanfu coming out of the screen and into the streets?
That's probably when we started the research, actually. Yeah, 2013. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of the timeline of the Hanfu movement? Like when did it start to emerge and when did it start to become a visible presence?
I think our research shows that it started at the early of 20th century, really.
21st century.
21st century,
Yeah.
sorry. So it starts at the 21st century. So around 2003, when around the time when China started to host a lot of the international events,
Yeah.
like APEC, like Olympics, all those things. And then lots of Chinese, Han Chinese start to realize that, well, we don't have ethnic clothes, like the Korean people have, or Vietnamese, we don't have a traditional clothes that represent us. To be honest, before Hanfu, there was another thing, like movement related to clothes, which called Tanzhuang, means a tongue clothes. I don't know whether you've heard about that. It's it's suit. It's just like Western suit, but with a bit Chinese style, and Chinese patterns on it. So before that, I know my parents, they love like a piece of Tanzhuang on them. And then people started, but no, that's not really, qipao, the kind of qipao, which
Yeah.
is from the late Qing Republican period. So that's a kind of clothes you could mostly tie it up to Chineseness. And then people started saying, no, that's actually from the Republican period. That's also been influenced by the Western culture, or also being influenced by the Manchurian culture. So that's not really Han Chinese, What is really Han Chinese? I think when those, in the early 21st century, when all those like global events, when Chinese leaders or Chinese representatives, especially Han representatives, start to show up on these global events, they start to realize, no, we don't have our own clothes, traditional ethnic clothes to wear. I think that's about the starting point. Then they started with the booming of the kind of social media, um, and then people start to wear Hanfu and post photos of them wearing it, and you start to see more photos of it. And also, one other thing I want to point out is some of the pop stars, songwriters, they are kind of quite heavily involved in the beginning of the movement. There was a Chinese pop singer called Jay Chou. I don't know whether you know him, but he's got this kind of Chineseness in his in his what do you call it? R&B kind of stuff,
Yeah.
kind of R&B, but with a Chineseness in it. And one of his lyric writers called Feng Wenshan, he was quite heavily involved at the beginning, I think. That's a kind of culture iconic for Hanfu at the beginning. So he was attending quite a lot of those Hanfu events at the beginning as well. Because through his songs, the way he write his lyrics, the kind of image he trying to kind of convey in his songs, that got kind of popular among young people, this kind of Chinese.
And that Tanzhuang, the Tang jacket you mentioned,
Yeah,
that's the sort of like an unadorned jacket that's with like buttons or like toggles down the front.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
it's
that's
the sort
correct.
of
Yeah,
the sort of thing the baddie wears in like a Shaw Brothers film. Like that, yeah. It's really interesting because Adidas has released a sort of Tang jacket this year, and it's very, very fashionable. It's like the hot thing on TikTok is this Adidas Tangjang jacket. And just on a personal level, Tinji, how do you feel about like Hanfu, like as a Chinese person?
Well, I certainly have a thing for it. Yeah, I love to kind of when I'm wearing it, I actually think, wow, it gives me another kind of feeling, especially when I'm living in a very fast-paced environment. It kind of, like many of our respondents have commented on that, it restricts you a little bit. It slows you down a little bit. It pushes you to think the things that you haven't thought before. So I do kind of feel I get a part of my own identity back. Yeah, but I do have a few Hanfu myself. I like to purchase more if I've got the money or the effort on it. But I wouldn't wear it regularly because it's just not practical enough for me. But in occasions, like ceremonies or something, I like to wear it up to show my ethnicity, to show my Hanness, and to show the kind of the elegance conveyed by the clothes and by the moves. Um, but yeah, that's what I was saying here.
It's really interesting you say about getting your identity back, because that's something that seems to be coming across when Andrew was talking about what motivates people to wear hanfu is a sense of like reclaiming something. What is it you think Chinese people, and you can answer this either generally speaking about the people you interviewed or on a personal level, what is it you think that Chinese people are regaining or feel like they're regaining when they wear hanfu?
I'd say it's inner peace.
Mm.
At least for me, it's inner peace, and a lot of the respondents also commented about inner peace because the society has developed too fast in the last 20 or 30 years, and you don't have anything to grab onto, especially psychologically or culturally. Um, and that makes people feel anxious, which is a word you also mentioned earlier. Anxiety about who am I, in this fast developing world. What do I want to get from it, or what can I get from it? And I think this kind of feeling make people feel, or especially young people, when they start to look for a job, um, like to separate from their original family and trying to establish themselves in the society. I think all those things can be quite frightening.
Yeah.
I mean, for early 20-year-olds. But Hanfu probably gives them some kind of inner peace. By wearing them, you have to slow down because it's designed not for like big moves most of the time. And you have to move in certain ways so that you don't reveal yourself. Um, so I think it forces you to slow down, forces you to rethink about why I move. For what? What do I want to show? All these kind of things. So I think um, it does bring that inner peace back to an individual, I do think. Yeah.
Joseph, I was just going to go back to an earlier question. You said what you were we surprised about anything. I probably just revised my previous statement a bit. I think because I read lots of Western scholarship on China, and some of it can be quite critical, maybe overly critical. So when I was going to meet the Hanfu, I think there's quite a lot of highly critical, not just sociological, but sort of cultural studies, which is highly critical of people. Some of it feels a little too black and white, and in a way, it's hard for me. I was quite swayed by some of this. So when I got there, it wasn't that I thought they were all going to be fascists or something. I suppose that's silly, but I just had this feeling that they were going to be very, very conservative. I think not rather racist, let's call it that. Very, very conservative. But actually, when I got to know them, I found that no, they weren't just conservative. There were conservative elements, but there's quite a lot of liberal things as well, and a desperate attempt to, in some ways, open China up, a kind of reflexive way of thinking, reflection on who we are and what we want to achieve. And just as Qianqian says, a sort of juggernaut of fast-paced development, whole swathes of old buildings and old areas, like the hutongs or the lilongs in Shanghai. Hutongs in Beijing, lilongs in Shanghai, all been demolished and replaced with new high rises and fast forms of development and lots of shopping malls. So there's that sort of, who are we? Are we Chinese anymore, or are we just another cookie cutter, I guess, Western, West meets East people, something like that. Chin Chin.
Yeah, I just want to say something because one of the questions we constantly asked our participants are, would you like to go back to the past?
Yeah,
If you could,
yeah,
and most of the respondents would say no, because they do aware that there are lots of bad things in the past. They're not as progressive as the modern days. I mean, there's lots of complaints about the modern days, lack of culture, etiquette, but they realize that to many ways we are more progressive than we used to be.
yeah,
So they want to bring the good bits from the past to the modern day to enrich the modern day rather than just to completely go back to the past. So I think they're very, very clear with that.
yeah. Uh, if I'd like to add to that as well. Yeah, I mean, when I was interviewing them, I asked myself, "Are you nostalgic, really?" Um, but I think that would be the wrong word for them because they're actually incredibly forward-looking.
Yeah.
So exactly as Qianqian says, they want to take the best bits of the past to enrich the present and the future, rather than a return to um, a complete return to a traditional way of life. So they're actually forward looking. But at the same time, there's a sort of that if we define conservatism as the value of tradition, uh, as a way of framing the present and the future, then that's how I see them. They're not modernists. They're not completely for wiping out the past to start again. No, it's really against that modernist idea of demolish and begin again. It's very much, no, what can we learn from the past and what can we salvage from it to enhance and revitalize the present and the future, I think.
Qianqian and Andrew, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks,
My
Joseph.
pleasure.
That was Andrew Law and Qianqian from the University of Newcastle. The Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding is a charity which has worked to promote understanding and friendship between British and Chinese people since 1965. If you would like to find out more, you can go to sacu.org.uk. If there are any other topics you would like to hear more about, or if you have any feedback, please contact us via the email address in the show description. This podcast was written, produced, and edited by me, Joseph Edmonds. The music is Chopin's Grand Valse Brillante, Opus number 18, produced by Gregor Quendel and released under a Creative Commons license.